Hi everybody, welcome back. Thank you so much for watching the other trainings. I'm assuming you didn't start randomly in the middle here and that you've made it through several other videos at this point. And I'm grateful that you're still here and that you're going through this next module. This next module will really focus on some different stuff. So now you have a good sense of kind of the overview of why we do what we do, the philosophy behind being a family advocate. And now we're going to transition to a new section that's going to look at things like maintaining healthy boundaries and taking care of yourself in this role, but also some strategies to be able to hopefully experience breakthrough in your relationship with your ally, and some kind of motivational techniques and ways to not only build your relationship, but also to hopefully get those results that we're looking for to help them complete their treatment plans as well. So this presentation is adapted from a presentation that Dr. Hannah Worster taught as she was teaching a class for prospective counselors. Dr. Hannah Worster is a member of the Foster Alight Board of Directors, and she is also a licensed professional counselor in Northern Colorado here. So she has a lot of expertise, not only as a counselor, but also as a teacher. And this presentation is really about people in helping roles. So she taught it to prospective counselors, but this can really apply to anybody in a helping role. And we have adapted it a little bit from what she taught in her class so that it's even more relevant to what we're going to do. So huge thank you to her. Let's dive in and see what she has for us. All right, so we're going to talk about the self of helper. And the helper is you, in this case, the family advocate. And we want to look at kind of self-awareness in that role and how can we be more just noticing what's going on, noticing our own feelings, our own body sensations, our emotions, that kind of stuff. Because those can help us to, if we monitor those and can use those as a tool, we can be more effective in our role. One of the concepts that we'll talk about a little bit is differentiation of self. So that's kind of like, can I be myself? Can I be in my role as a family advocate and kind of separate my reaction to some of the difficult things that I'm hearing, and kind of be okay in this role, and then also have these reactions to maybe some heavy or difficult things that we're talking about. So being able to separate ourselves and take care of ourselves and kind of be okay even when we're next to someone that we care about who's maybe not okay. We'll look at self-esteem and how that plays in a little bit, personal worldview, values, how that relates, inner conversations, ways that we talk to ourselves, and just ways that we think in general. So this is so important for a couple of reasons. Number one, the quality of a therapeutic relationship trumps technique every time. And there's actually a mountain of research that shows this. This is true for counselors, but I think it's true in other helping roles as well, that there are all sorts of counseling theories and all sorts of techniques that you can use, but and a lot of those are great, and a lot of those are helpful, and they're proven with research and stuff like that. But there is nothing more important than the quality of the relationship between the helper and the person who's receiving help. That is more important than anything else. So hopefully that's comforting to you, as you're maybe not a licensed professional counselor. Maybe you don't have a ton of experience here. You do have a ton of experience building relationships and helping people to feel valued and loved. And I don't think you'd be in this situation if that didn't appeal to you. So I encourage you to lean into that. It is most important over everything else. It's most important to build a strong relationship with the family or the biological parent that you're working with. We also want to talk about this idea called countertransference. And this is an idea that when we're having difficult conversations, and you kind of see it in this cartoon here, this is like the person in the therapist's office, and then this is the therapist who's just like losing it because of presumably what this guy's telling him. Countertransference is what's happening right here, where the person who's trying to help is so overwhelmed by what's going on that now this person is kind of draining. Now he's needing help. So we want to be aware of that and try to avoid that as much as we can. We want to try to take care of ourselves outside of the context of the family advocate relationship, so that they can bring stuff to us and tell us stuff and kind of unload it, and we're going to be okay with that. They're not going to feel like they have to hold back or to help us, because we're really trying to focus on their well-being, and we don't want them to have to focus on ours at the same time. And that's a little bit of a fine line to walk, because I think we talked about in one of the other videos how we want to build a relationship that has some reciprocity, some mutuality, that it's not just me always helping you, that I can also ask for help in some ways, that we want to make them feel like equals as much as possible. So I think it could go to the extent of, if you wanted to, this is not something you have to do, but this kind of thing where you go, hey, you know what, my friend is moving, or there's a family in our church who's moving and they need more people to help. I'm going to help. Do you want to come with me? Like, would you come help because we need more bodies or whatever, right? Like, if we can ask them for help, or even tell us, hey, I have this difficult presentation coming up with work later in the week and I'm kind of nervous about it. Would you pray for me? Assuming if they're also religious or something like that. So we want to appropriately ask for help. We want to have appropriate reciprocity in the relationship with our ally, but we also don't want them to feel like they have to rescue us or care for us emotionally, especially as it relates to our reaction to them, our reaction to their situation. We want to be able to take that and be okay with it, so that they can kind of unload this stuff that they maybe haven't really had anyone to unload it with. All right, so conflicting values may also come up, where sometimes these bio parents are in this situation for a reason, and sometimes it's because of their values. It's because their values have led them to make choices that have led them to the consequences of where they are now. So we want to be careful to take a non-judgmental posture and to try to find ways of helping, ways of finding solutions and progress that resonate with their values. We don't want to superimpose our own value set on them, because for one thing, it's just not durable. If we do that and it doesn't resonate with what they believe, then it won't last. But for another thing, I think it's more loving, it's more kind, it's more, we have that equality more if we're really understanding, what do you want, what do you believe, and helping them to build a better way of being on that rather than our own. We want to be aware of risk of burnout too. This is a relationship that is lopsided, where you're going to be pouring more into their lives, and if we're not careful, there can be a risk of burnout with that. So we'll talk about some boundaries and some ways we can mitigate that. And I also want to encourage you that the resonance that you can experience when they're sharing difficult things, when you resonate with that and when you reflect some of that back appropriately, that can be really healthy for your relationship. And it can also be informative. When they're telling you stuff and it's really striking a chord with you, it can be really informative for you about what they're experiencing, and sometimes even what they need. So it's not bad for you to feel what they're feeling or for you to resonate with what they're feeling, but we want to be careful that they're not feeling like they have to take care of us in that time. All right, so a few strategies we can use. One is listening to our body and feelings. Another is increasing self-awareness about emotional triggers, our strengths, and our values. So emotional triggers, thinking about what are the difficult things that I've been through in my life, particularly relevant to the family advocate role in the situation that my ally might be in. What are the things that are most likely to strike a chord within me? And if I can do my own work on that beforehand, and if I can be kind of prepared about how I'm going to respond if these things come up, that'll help me to handle those things better in the moment. Also, being aware of your strengths as an individual. How do you build relationship best? Because it's not universal. I think we can all think of people in our lives that, man, this person is just so good at speaking words of encouragement, where like this person just notices stuff I'm good at, just seems to know the words that I need to hear to help me feel validated and encouraged going forward. And then there are other people who are like, man, these people are just, they're just so considerate about making sure that they ask me how I'm feeling, and that they ask really good questions to get to the thing under the thing that makes me feel really understood. So what are your strengths in relationships? How do you build relationships well? And how can you bring those to the family advocate role and really come from a strengths-based perspective of using those to accentuate your effectiveness, to make you even better in that role? And then what are your values? What are the things that might conflict with your allies' values? And how can you kind of set your values aside, not to say that they don't matter, but just that you're focusing on this other person. So, how can you keep those in their appropriate place? That's probably a better way to say it. Self-care is a big one, and this is also highly personal. What is self-care for me is very different than my wife, for example. My wife likes massages, and I don't. Like, that might feel weird, and usually when I tell people that, they're like, what is wrong with you? But I really don't care for massages. Like, it doesn't feel bad, but it's like, whatever. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't do anything for me. When I get out, I'm kind of like, I wish I had that hour back or whatever. My wife, it's a totally different thing. It's like, it changes her week, maybe even her month. She just loves it, and it's so life-giving. So for me, what might be life-giving is like taking a walk out in nature, and that might do a lot more for my soul and my self-care than what that would do for my wife. But for her, a massage would be great. So think about, what are those things that allow you to be in a good place, and how can you do that stuff well, especially being conscious of this in a helping relationship where you are pouring yourself out for another person, so that you make sure that you're pouring from a full cup, rather than pouring from an empty one, which can lead to a sense of bitterness or obligation. And really, we're not at our best unless we're taking care of ourselves. This is the whole oxygen mask analogy, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first in the case of an emergency before you help others. Because while it can seem better to help them first, if we're not in a place to be helping, we can only help so much. So self-care is really about being our best self so that we can be the best for others as well. Seeking support and supervision. Supervision is really like a counseling term, but I think it applies to a family advocate as well. That when we reach the end of what we can do, when we run out of ideas, when we hit roadblocks in this relationship, I encourage you to reach out, to find other help. We do not have to do this alone, and really we shouldn't. We shouldn't be in this role alone, particularly when we're running into obstacles. So I encourage you to reach out to me, reach out to somebody else, reach out to another family advocate, reach out to a friend, somebody you trust who's good at this kind of thing, and let them encourage you, and let them also give you ideas and potentially expand your thinking on what would be effective. Another idea is just attending your own therapy. If you haven't done this, I would encourage you to look into it. It is not required by any means for family advocates, but especially if you find yourself struggling, or if you find this role bringing up past traumas, sometimes that's a clue that there's something that is unresolved, where you could be leading a happier, more fulfilling, healthier life if you did some work on that in a counseling context, a therapy context. So I'd encourage you to consider that, especially if it feels like a need as you step into this work even further. All right, so a few questions to consider, and I'll kind of read through these, and then I would encourage you to pause and think about them a little bit. First question is, What kind of situations or allies might elicit an emotional response from you? The second is, how would you know you're reacting to an ally in this way? Sometimes our reactions are so automatic we wouldn't even necessarily realize that we're reacting in a way that we are. Number 3, what values do you hold that might conflict with those of an ally? And number 4, list some of your personal strengths and weaknesses that may surface when helping other adults. So I encourage you to pause and think about those a little bit. And there may be more work to do after this video is over with this stuff too, to really think more deeply. And as you're preparing, these are really good questions to help make sure that we react well. So often in our relationships, if we don't react the way that we want to, we end up conveying a person, a version of ourselves that we don't really want to convey, that maybe isn't even our truest selves. But a lot of times we can preempt that by thinking through these kinds of situations first and going, okay, if this person says this, if this topic comes up, here's how I'm going to react. So I would encourage you to pause, think through that, and then we'll come back in a minute and continue. Okay, let's talk about boundaries. This is one of the most important topics that we have in the training because without it we could get into pretty big trouble, but we could also get into a lot of situations that are just counter to what we're trying to accomplish. So I think this is a question, if you want to pause and consider, you certainly can. Why might it be important for family advocates to maintain healthy boundaries in this role? I have some reasons on here, there may be more, but some reasons on the slide are sustainability and balance. I have boundaries now so I can help continue to help later. Number 2 would be effectiveness. I implement boundaries to help give my ally what they need, not necessarily what they want or what we might do if this wasn't on our radar, if we were just going at autopilot. We want to be really strategic, and part of that strategy is boundaries. And number 3, I have boundaries for protection. I use boundaries to protect the future and to protect other loved ones. So without appropriate boundaries, well-intended family advocates could find themselves in messy and counterproductive situations. So there are a few boundaries that we have for Foster Alight that are absolute non-negotiable. And those are mostly for legal reasons. The first one, though, is not so much for legal reasons as it could undermine what we're trying to accomplish. So the first one is, do not let your ally live with you or become otherwise overly dependent on you. This includes, but is not limited to, financial support. So there's an asterisk on that because that's not to say you can't ever get them anything. That's not to say that you can't give them small gifts or that you can't buy coffee for them or something like that. But it is to say your role is not to sustain them financially. And doing so could cause a relationship that is inherently conflicted, and a relationship where they come to equate your financial support with your love. And that is not what we want to do. That just gets into a whole different realm. So there are plenty of other places that they can go to get the support that they need, and we want to help connect them to those resources whenever we need to. But we are asking you to please do not step into that role, because your role is very important and that could compromise your role as a family advocate. All right, cool. So the second one is absolutely no transporting bio-parents or their children. This is a tricky one because it can be inconvenient. These bio-parents sometimes don't have their own vehicles or transportation. So this can be challenging, but this is really a liability thing. Our insurance doesn't cover that kind of situation, and it could get messy. So we're asking that you don't transport bio-parents or their children, and that means that you may have to kind of meet them where they're at if they don't have transportation. So think about where's a place that you feel comfortable and safe meeting, especially for those first time or two as you're getting to know each other. We recommend probably not in their house or wherever they're living if it's just the two of you for the first time. We recommend somewhere public at first. Make sure that everything's good. But it doesn't have to be really populated either, because the privacy can be a real concern. You're talking about some heavy stuff, some things that involve a lot of shame for them sometimes. So a coffee shop may not be the best choice, for example. They might prefer like a park where you can have plenty of distance between you and the next person. So think about that. Another option is a church lobby, if they're comfortable with that. I met with a family several times in the lobby of Resurrection Fellowship, which is great because they have a coffee shop, but then they also have a ton of space where nobody's around. So we could really spread out. We could get coffee, but then we could kind of get out of the way. And coffee is just nice, but it's not a requirement. So it could be another church lobby where you just kind of find your own area. Timberline has some great spaces too, where you're around people, you're visible, but you also can have some privacy. So think about that creatively. But how can you find a place that they can access without transporting them? And finally, don't spend unsupervised time with children unless cleared by a DHS caseworker. That's their children, of course. And somebody asked me last time I taught this, like when would that happen? It's not a normal situation for a family advocate, but it could come up because their kids are involved, and it just could happen. So we just want to say, just make sure it's not unsupervised unless you've gone through the proper channels through the DHS caseworker. All right, I believe that's it for the non-negotiables. So time, we also need to put some time boundaries on stuff. The expectation we're setting for bio-parents is meeting once per week for an hour. And we're telling them that. That's what we're asking of from volunteers, and that's for 6 months. You can exceed that hour per week though if you would like to. Okay, that's up to you. If you'd like to go above and beyond, feel free, but please do not feel obligated. This could happen like if there's a court hearing that you want to support them and just kind of attend. You're welcome to do that kind of thing. Or other meetings or things like that, or driving them. Nope, we're not driving them. Sorry, I'm thinking of a different thing. Anyway, driving to meet them to like go to rehab or something. If you want to, walk them in the building and kind of help them get checked in, or like little things like that. Sometimes those gestures can go a long way. Again, they're not the expectation, but you're welcome to. Just be careful not to overcommit yourself. And again, we're trying to be careful not to create dependency on us. We want to be a friend, we want to be a support, but we don't want to be in a situation where they can only succeed with our help. We want to create a situation where they grow the confidence and skills that they need to be able to move forward from this relationship and sustainably succeed in the future on their own or without us. All right, so as you think through your personal boundaries ahead of time, that can help navigate difficult situations. So a few questions for you to consider. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to each of these, although you may have some strong initial reactions. So I encourage you to think through these. Number one, should you meet with your parent partner, with your ally in your home? Should your ally join your friend group? Are you comfortable with your ally joining your place of worship? Again, those don't necessarily have right or wrong answers, but they are questions that we want to consider ahead of time so that you know the answer to these and you're not put in an awkward situation. All that being said, as you engage in this work, if you come up with other situations that we didn't foresee here, that we didn't talk about, that you think we should include in future trainings, I would encourage you to reach out and let me know so that we can include that in future iterations of this. Okay, so in a moment I'm going to invite you to pause and think through some of this. These two questions here. First of all, how can we lovingly communicate our boundaries? I'm going to help with some of that, like the 1 hour per week for 6 months. That's going to be something that I'm going to help communicate. But for those times where they ask you a question and the answer has to be no, what's the best way to lovingly communicate that no? And number two, which boundaries, if any, should be communicated beforehand, and which should be addressed as issues arise? So I invite you to take a minute and pause and think through those questions, and then we'll come back and discuss a little bit more. Okay, so as you thought through this, my guess is that you concluded that there aren't simple or clean answers to these questions necessarily, and we can't perfectly foresee all of this. I think the first question is really tricky, although the second question sort of hints at part of the answer. Sometimes communicating something preemptively can help avoid an awkward situation later, and can actually be most loving, especially when people are uncertain about their standing, when they're feeling insecure, shameful, things like that. Good, positive, proactive communication that keeps them involved, helps them to know what's going on and what to expect, can be very anchoring, can help them build more confidence. So that can be very loving, the right kind of proactive communication. But if we're not careful about how we do that, we can also push them away. So, hey, I just want to let you know before we get started, here are some boundaries to our relationship. That doesn't feel good. So we do have to be tactful and strategic about how we do that. And I think there are not super clear answers about which boundaries should be communicated beforehand and which should be addressed as issues arise. I think there are ways to address all of them as issues arise, and there are a few that it makes sense to communicate it beforehand. So if you have a position on one of these, like, no, this definitely needs to be communicated beforehand, and we haven't talked about it yet, I would encourage you to let me know, because that may be something that we want to just establish as an expectation across the board, where I can build it into kind of the intake process, or we can just train people to, this is something you definitely want to talk about up front. Okay, so let's talk briefly about cultural competence. This is the ability to interact effectively and appropriately with people of different cultures than ourselves. And culture is kind of a nebulous term that can mean a lot of different things. To the extent that my culture might be quite a bit different than my wife's culture, even though she and I grew up in the same places from the time I was in late middle school on. And even though we've been married for almost 20 years, or been together for almost 20 years now, even though we're the same race and the same religion, she and I still have some very different cultural background, and different ways that we interpret things, different ways that we function in the world. So cultural competence is not just important for people with different religious beliefs or different ethnicities or races. It really is the ability to navigate differences between people and the way that they operate in the world, even when they seem mostly the same. We want to be careful with those assumptions. So it is an ongoing process, and I kind of just answered the question about why is it important, but it really is about being able to build a safe relationship between the two of you, a relationship that acknowledges differences in a healthy and affirming way, and in a way that makes it safe for them to function as their true selves in this context, and to kind of bring all of themselves to that. So step one is really just awareness, this acceptance of the fact that people are different, we all have culture, and my way is not the only way or the best way. And that's tricky. Like, it sounds so obvious, like, well, yeah, of course, I would never think that. But I do think that sometimes, and a lot of times I don't even know it. A lot of times I just think, well, this is the best way to have a family, or this is the best way to build financial success going forward, or this is the best way to function as an employee, or this is the way I should treat the police or the government or whatever. And realizing that my way is not the only way or the best way, and also that when people have different perspectives, a lot of times it's not right or wrong. And a lot of times when it's different than mine, it's a function of the way that those institutions treat their culture differently than they treat my culture, maybe. So having a self-awareness of my own culture, where I'm from, who I am, and then being aware of and curious about how my culture differs from that of others. So here's a great quote that I like. The world in which you were born is just one model of reality. Other cultures are not failed attempts at being you. They are unique manifestations of the human spirit. That sounds so nice. And when we rub up against the reality of that and a specific situation, sometimes it can be hard to do that. But I love that. I love that concept. And that's what I'm going to encourage us to embrace here. Step 2 is knowledge. And that's not to say you're expected to be an expert on their culture, but just that we have openness to learning about other cultures. We can make some useful generalizations, mostly to help us understand, but avoid harmful stereotypes or assumptions. So, for example, if I know that where this person is from, their culture views eye contact differently, this person might be an exception. But if they tend to avert their gaze from me, I can be less intense about the eye contact that I offer them, and I can make sure that I'm not taking it personally when they're not reciprocating my eye contact. So things like that. And recognition that even within cultures, individual differences exist. So we have to treat each person as an individual, not as a token of the culture they seem to represent. And step 3, sensitivity and skills. So using awareness and knowledge to recognize the ways that culture plays out, our differences and our similarities, our conflicts and miscommunication. And so much of this is, again, curiosity. And just like asking questions that are open-ended, that are not assuming, and that go, what do you appreciate in this type of situation, right? And we don't even have to say, what does your culture appreciate? Because again, that can feel like tokenism, where we're just making them a representative of their culture. But if we just say, as an individual, what do you prefer in this kind of situation? That can help them feel understood, and it can help us to know how to respond to them and support them better. So some techniques around all this. Number 1, develop self-awareness, as we talked about before. Maintain a curious stance and open mind. Avoid making assumptions. Behave with acceptance and respect. Listen and collaborate on solutions. So it's not always just us telling, well, here's what I think would work. But that we're like, well, what do you think would work in this situation? Or what about this, right? And then get their reactions and then maybe make adjustments where you can. Be responsive to individual needs and continue to learn about culture. All right, so we're going to wrap this portion of the video up, and we're going to transition to the next video in the YouTube playlist and training playlist. It's short, it's 1 minute and 41 seconds long. You may have seen it before. It is just a treat. It's one of those, there are videos in your life where you watch them and it's just kind of an unforgettable experience. I don't want to overhype this if you haven't seen it before, but that's what it was for me. I always remembered it, and it's quite poignant. You'll probably find lots of other places in your life that you can apply it, but it certainly applies to the family advocate role as well. So anyway, thank you again for watching. Go ahead and take a look at the next video in the playlist, and we'll see you back here after that.